What the scariest true story you know? The story of the Lake Nyos disaster. The lake periodically belches a cloud of invisible carbon dioxide gas that suffocates everything within a 16-mile radius. In 1986, over 1,700 people and all their livestock died without even understanding what was happening to them. I've told this story before. I'm an eye doctor, and I had a patient come to me with an infected eyelid. 2 other eye doctors tried to treat and failed. They were dumping all sorts of medicine into it, and it wasn't getting any better. At this point, it was swollen and painful for weeks with no improvement despite being on tons of meds. Apparently neither of them thought to flip the lid upside down. You know that gross trick some kids do with their upper eyelids? It was a painful maneuver for her very swollen eyelid, which might explain it. Anyhow, there appeared to be what looked like a visible abscess inside the tissue with thick gooey material. I thought I'd give it a nudge and saw it move. This wasn't an abscess, it was something else. I managed to remove it quite easily in one whole piece. It was a fly larva. The patient told me that she had a bug hit her in the eye a few days before she got this infection. I removed the larva, and within 2 days the wound closed, and she was 100% recovered on basic antibiotic eye drops. Yes, I do have the photos from this case for those interested. TLDR, patient had a bug lay an egg in her eyelid and I removed the larva. Joseph Fritzl imprisoned his daughter in a secret room in his basement for 24 years and fathered 6 to 7 children on her. My maternal grandfather, in the days before hot water on tap, put a big pot on to boil before leaving for work for his wife and kids to bathe with. The pot boiled over and extinguished the flame, and he returned to find them dead of carbon monoxide poisoning. My mother was of his second marriage. I'm not sure what the entire story is, but there was a body discovered somewhere in Siberia. His cause of death was freezing, but something was off. Turns out, he had been attacked by a tiger. The tiger used his jaws and grabbed the guy by his backpack, picked him up over his head, and slammed him so hard that it snapped both of his femurs. Poor dude lived 3 days after the attack, crawling around in the snow. The USS West Virginia was a ship damaged during the attack on Pearl Harbor. After the ship was attacked, the people on board heard banging noises coming from inside the ship. Turns out that these noises were people. They were trapped in a room to where they couldn't be broken out of it because of the water that would seep in and drown them, and they couldn't be brought out from the top because of the gases that lingered there that were extremely flammable. When the vessel was salvaged 6 months later, the bodies of these 3 men were found. The other things that remained were empty cans of food and water, and a calendar marked from December 7th to December 23rd. This means they were trapped in there for 16 days. They probably kept wondering if they were ever going to make it out, and then had to come to the realization that they might not be saved, and they had the fear of drowning in the tight little compartment of the ship. They had to face the realization that you are going to die and the psychological torture that goes along with it. I worked in forensic medicine. My boss had to perform an autopsy on a chopped-off head that was found by 2 completely traumatized children. The autopsy itself took 7 hours because the person had over 56 different injuries to the head. The Broken Arrow killings. 2 brothers brutally murdered their entire family. At one point their young, 5 or 6-ish, siblings were hiding in the bathroom when one of the brothers pretended to need their help. Soon as they let him in, he killed them. One of their last words were, "Please don't kill me, I love you." Horrifying story. A woman I worked with a few years ago told me how her life had changed drastically. She went from having a decent job to becoming an alcoholic and working as a cleaner. She had planned to move to Spain with her husband and young daughter, and had a great job lined up out there. The plan was her husband and daughter would fly over first, and she would fly over a week or 2 later due to finishing her old job a little later than planned. Her husband rang her on the day he arrived and said the house was lovely, and the furniture had arrived by ferry ECT. That was the last time she ever heard from him. Her husband and daughter was found dead by authorities a few days after she rang, explaining she was concerned for their welfare, as she had had no contact with them, and she was extremely worried. It was carbon monoxide poisoning. It is so scary to think how fast your life can change. The Silent Gibbon twins. 2 sisters who rarely spoke except to each other. They were sent to separate boarding schools to get them to talk to other people, but entered severe catatonia. They were eventually hospitalized and made a pact that if one of them died, the other must speak and live a normal life. They had a month-long discussion and decided which one should commit suicide. Eventually, one died of heart inflammation. No causes noted on the autopsy. And just moments after the planned time, the other spoke. I'm free at last, liberated, and at last Jennifer has given up her life for me. The blue ring octopus has a venom that causes paralysis, causing people to die of cardiac arrest or because of hypoxia. There is no antidote. The cure is CPR or life support for the hour or so it takes for the venom to leave the body. There was a man who was bitten by a blue ring octopus. As the lifeguard was performing CPR, he was lying on his back on the beach, facing the sky, eyes frozen open. Unable to close his eyes or communicate with the others, he lied there as the sun slowly burned out his retinas. He became permanently blind. This was posted here the last time. The story is about a woman who was found pushing her baby had been dead on a swing for 2 days. The baby died from hypothermia and dehydration. She was found not criminally negligent due to schizophrenia. Here is the article. Absolutely horrifying. One day, this kid gets taken to school by his stepmom for a big science fair. Things go well, he has his picture taken. Stepmom watches him go down the hallway to class, and he's never seen again. The story that inspired Candyman is pretty creepy. A woman in a Chicago apartment was murdered by some drug dealer who lived next door. How did he get into her apartment? Through a hole behind her bathroom cabinet/mirror. I read a story recently about Paulette Gerbera Farah, a 4-year-old child who went missing from her room in 2010. Her parents immediately notified authorities and started a social media campaign to find Paulette. Paulette's room was searched multiple times and used by her parents to do media interviews. Here's the terrifying part. Paulette was found dead 10 days later. In her bed. She had wedged herself between the mattress and the footboard and suffocated. Here is her bed before they found her. It's insane looking at that picture and knowing she is there, and no one had found her. Here is an article for anyone interested. Well, this is scary in a weird personal way, but here goes. My grandfather was hit in the lung pretty bad by a sniper in WW2. The bullet would have hit him right in his heart, but at the last second, he hunched a little bit to light a cigarette. So, if my grandfather wasn't a smoker, I probably wouldn't exist right now. I grew up on a farm in the Texas Panhandle, the boxy part on top. In a house a few miles from ours, most of the members of a family were randomly murdered. One girl, 10 years old at the time, survived by pretending to be dead. A few years ago, a dude dressed as a clown came to a camp I went to. Apparently, he broke into the cabin I was staying in and stole stuff from some people in my cabin. He took primarily cash and a phone that kids had on them. I saw him there, but I was so young I didn't think much of it. Apparently, they couldn't find him because of the gloves he wore and his full body costume. All of the kids had their stuff replaced, but the craziest part is a few of us heard a scream that could not have come from a grown man that came from the road. That dude was weird, and it was terrifying as an 11-year-old. Explorers, like a century or two ago, went to look about the Arctic, but had their supplies accidentally destroyed and soon, they all ran out. They hunted a polar bear and ate the insides of it. Newt at the time knew about how deathly a polar bear's liver was. Because of the high amounts of vitamin A, which can be bad for skin too, toxicity made him and his crew deathly ill, and when one of them felt that their foot was wet, he took it out, and the lining of his skin came off with the boot. True story. TLDR, explorers killed a polar bear, ate its liver, XME under the effects of vitamin A, skin loss, and toxicity, and most probably died. This one kid back in the early 20th century named Bobby Dunbar. He went missing, and after like a year of searching for him, his parents came across a man with a kid who looked a lot like Bobby. They believed it was their kid, and after a legal battle with the kid's supposed mother, they brought the kid home. A wild-ass parade happened due to the missing kid's return. He lived and died believing he was, in fact, Bobby Dunbar. Well, a few decades later, his granddaughter asked Bobby's nephew, I think, for a DNA sample so she could see if her and Bobby's nephew were related. Turns out, they weren't. Meaning the real Bobby Dunbar is still missing and probably died alone without his parents. When I was 7, I was raking rocks in my aunt's front yard, and a beat-up pickup truck pulled up. The man got out, fiddled with something under the hood, and then closed it. He asked me, "Hey kid, do you know how to pop a clutch?" Spending my childhood on a farm, I did indeed know how. "Yes," I responded. "Give me a hand real quick," he said. So I started walking towards his truck. At the last second, my mom called out to me from the garage, and I turned around to see what she wanted. I heard the door slam, the truck start, and he drove away. That memory never really came up until one day, about 30 years later. I jump up after laying down to go to bed, when out of nowhere it came back, and it hit me. This guy was trying to kidnap me. What the fuck? What bullet did I dodge? I mean, you ever have a memory come back, and you get scared? I mean, scared over the memory? I was shaking for at least a half hour over it. It still freaks me out thinking about it. The story about the entire town in Iran that was buried under such an intense snowstorm. It smothered 4,000 people. Also, that molasses flood that drowned a bunch of people. I like the story of Tarar, the man who ate everything. Whilst in hospital, he was accused of eating offal from the bins, and a toddler went missing for which he was also blamed. He ate puppies and lizards. He ate a banquet for 6 on his own. He had very stretchy skin that would glow and sweat profusely after eating. He had frequent exudative diarrhea, and an odor emanated from him, which could still be smelled from a distance. He was shunned by society. A good explanation of his very interesting story, including his very short time as a spy, can be found on Wikipedia. Chicago Tylenol murders. The Chicago Tylenol murders were a series of poisoning deaths resulting from drug tampering in the Chicago metropolitan area in 1982. The victims had all taken Tylenol-branded acetaminophen capsules that had been laced with potassium cyanide. A total of 7 people died in the original poisonings, with several more deaths in subsequent copycat crimes. No suspect was ever charged or convicted of the poisonings. The incidents led to reforms in the packaging of over-the-counter substances and to federal anti-tampering laws. The actions of Johnson & Johnson to reduce deaths and warn the public of poisoning risks have been widely praised as an exemplary public relations response to such a crisis. Just heard today from my mom for the first time. My grandma grew up on a farm. She was over at a friend's for the night, and as they were getting in bed, the other girl said, "Oh, we forgot to check the pasture gate." They got out there and my gran says, "We locked this." Her friend's almost casual response, "I know, there's a man under the bed." It wasn't uncommon for drifters to show up places like that, and this was what they were taught to do. My father used to work as a medical examiner. He was the guy they send when a crime scene contained a dead person, to give a preliminary examination of the corpse before it got sent off for more rigorous investigation. One of his worst stories was being called in for a child, around 9 or 10, that had ostensibly been killed in a drive-by shooting while he and his older brother were playing in the front yard. When my dad examined the corpse, however, the presence of gunpowder burns across his face indicated the shot must have been point blank. His older brother had lied about the shooting. He'd shot him himself. Murder of Sylvia Likens. The parents of Sylvia Likens left her with her caregiver. The caregiver used her sister as a coercive threat, and along with her children and their friends tortured and killed her. This true story was also made into a 2007 movie, The Girl Next Door, which was based on the 1989 novel, The Girl Next Door. My great-aunt woke up in the middle of the night. She heard her dog making these low growls. She was single at the time, and living alone in her ranch-style home. She walked out to her living room to check things out. She didn't see or hear anything out of the ordinary, so she decided to make sure her door and front windows were locked. Door was locked. First window she checked was locked. When she lifted the mini blind on the second window, it was wide open and a guy in a ski mask was standing there. She said he laughed this evil laugh and said, "Party time." Then he started to climb in. She screamed that she had a gun. Her dog started barking his head off. The would-be rapist decided to bolt. My aunt did get a gun after that and learned how to use it. I can't even think about what would have happened to her if she didn't have her dog to warn her. Sad face. In 1983, an accidental large-scale nuclear war almost started by a Soviet satellite malfunction, only stopped by Stanislav Petrov disobeying orders. My soccer coach used to tell us this story whenever we were practicing heading the ball. My coach said he had a player who went out of his way to head the ball as much as possible and got really good at it. But one time the ball hit him square on the top of his head and his tongue was out. The guy ended up biting his own tongue in half. You might think he was just telling a story, but he told it with such seriousness, I 100% believe him. Scared me off heading the ball every chance I got. Germanwings Flight 9525, Wikipedia. The co-pilot locked himself in the cockpit and set the airplane for a slow descent into the French Alps. For 10 minutes, the crew desperately tried to get back into the cockpit, but in this post-9/11 world, The door was designed to withstand assault did not fail. This was a daytime flight. Passengers knew what was happening. They could see the mountains getting closer out the windows. This wasn't a quick, "What's that? OMG, out." This was a long, drawn-out realization of what was coming, and the end was inevitable. Chilling. Honestly, I'm not sure anything makes me feel as much terror as stuff like the recent road rage murder of Aiden Leos. To think that one moment you're driving down the road, and the next, your innocent little baby is bleeding to death in your arms. Your sweet 6-year-old child dies terrified and in pain, and there's absolutely nothing you can do to help, and nothing you could have done to prevent it. All because some inhuman scum-sucking sack of piss was annoyed with the way you were driving. Ever since I read about this story, my anxiety has been through the roof. I can't stop thinking about the hell that his poor mother is living every day. I wish I believed in hell, so I could feel like those responsible will go there, because there is truly no punishment on this earth that is enough to give those monsters what they deserve. James Bulger. He was just 2 years old, and with his mom running errands. She let go of his hand to pay the cashier, and he wandered away. 2 10-year-old boys spotted him, lured him toward them, took him by the hands and led him away. They took him to a remote location, pushing and kicking at him the whole time. Some people questioned the 2 kids with the crying toddler, but they lied saying he was their brother, and nobody intervened further. They took him to a secluded spot and tortured him. I don't want to recount the torture details, it's just too gruesome. They left his body on some railroad tracks hoping that being run over by a train would make it look like an accident. He was found days later, his body severed in half by a train. The boys were caught and became the youngest convicted murderers in British history. Security footage from the day they took James shows them watching children, picking out a target. And they were just kids themselves. They were released at 18. One of them is back in jail for possessing child abuse photos on his computer. The most terrifying thing about this for me is that my own son is only 2 now, and James's murderers were just children too. It was premeditated and intentional and entirely random. Just a momentary lapse in attention, and he became a target of 2 murderous children. Children. To think that children younger than my stepson are capable of such a thing, ugh. Everything about this case is just horrifying. The New London School Explosion. A school in Texas in 1937 tried to tap into natural gas on their own, and it ended up leaking and blowing up the school. It's the reason they make natural gas scented in Texas, and probably the US now. I'm amazed I never heard of this in school, because it seems like something that should be taught. I read some survivor stories, and I had fucking nightmares. It was horrible. 3 in particular stuck with me. One was a 7 or 8-year-old girl. She saw her best friend and playmate with her entire body crushed by concrete with only her shoulders and head above it, and she still had a lollipop in her mouth, like she didn't know what happened. Another was a guy, I think a 16 to 17-year-old, helping undig people and bring them out of the wreckage. He saw a dad holding his daughter crying his eyes out, while the back of the girl's head was broken open with her brain on the ground next to her. The last was a 9-ish-year-old girl who went to find her mom after it happened. There was a PTA meeting going on at the time, so there was a lot of parents at the scene. Her mom was freaking out trying to find her, but didn't even recognize her. She went up to her mom and called out to her, but she just kept saying, "You're not my daughter." She was so covered in blood and ash and tears that her own mother couldn't recognize her. It was a truly horrifying thing. My dad worked in a morgue during college in the 60s. One time on the night shift, he was training a recent hire who was wheeling a body down the hallway. The body was under a sheet, but all of a sudden started to sit up. The guy immediately freaked out, ran out the doors and quit. Apparently a dead body can have muscle contractions in the abs causing it to start sitting up. The more you know, I guess. My mother's friend left her abusive husband. My mother met her while working at a women's shelter. They were really close, and my mother fought so hard to get her somewhere safe. They did everything right. She helped her file divorce papers. And then one morning my mom can't get her on the phone, but they had plans to meet for lunch. And she checks the newspaper. And she calls in sick to work, which she never did. And she sat me down in tears and told me what happened. Her friend was home with her son when her ex broke in. He killed her and left the baby there in his mother's blood. And then he hung himself outside of Rayleigh's. Last I heard, their almost 2-year-old went to live with his uncle. I can't imagine how terrifying it was for the baby to cry to himself in his mother's blood for the almost 2 days until he was found. A neighbor just regaled me with this heartbreaker, which isn't terrifying except for its mundanity. His sister, her husband, and 2 kids went up to Washington to camp every year. So they're up there in May, early June, sometime during 2002 to 2003, and the son goes to use a rope swing to jump into the lake. Family watching, fun times. But the boy botches the jump and ends up with the rope around his ankle, falls badly, breaks a bone, and is just dragging underwater, flailing. Dad immediately springs into action to save his son and dives into shallow water. Smashes his skull open, is instantly paralyzed and drowns. The mother obviously goes to save them both, dives into the water, and dies of a heart attack. The son stops flailing, and is just hanging there. The daughter, 10 years old, had no idea 2 minutes prior that she would be sitting safely on shore, watching her family die. Fucking heartbreaking. She was raised by my neighbor as a daughter. I just can't even imagine what the fuck that would be like. Just normally mundane risks proving lethal in less than 200 heartbeats. This is a true story from close to my hometown. A 1-year-old girl got killed by 2 dogs. They literally ate the little girl. Even worse, the owners of the dogs were also in the same family as the girl. The Jonestown mass murder-suicide. Jonestown, November 18, 1978, location of the mass murder-suicide of members of the California-based People's Temple cult at the behest of their charismatic but paranoid leader Jim Jones, in Jonestown Agricultural Commune, Guyana. The death toll exceeded 900, including some 300 who were age 17 and under, making the incident one of the largest mass deaths in American history. In my hometown, there was a pastor who killed his wife. He was the priest at the church very close to my house, and he had given her sleeping pills to help her headache. Then he has drawn a bath for her and put her in it. After that he went to the church and prayed. When he got home his wife was dead. He called the cops and told them he tried to get her out but couldn't. When they got there, he was completely dry. Pretty crazy stuff. During college, I lived in an apartment with a community pool. There were a bunch of us having beers at the pool one night over summer term, and one of my friends ran to jump in the pool but changed his mind at the last second. His feet slipped out from under him on the wet concrete, and he went down. He broke his neck in the edge of the pool, never walked again, and had extremely limited upper body function. I watched someone's life be ruined, and it was terrifying. Listen to the lifeguard and walk. I had a guy tell me a story a couple decades ago about how he was hiking in an area in South America and wandered away from other hikers in the area. The ground was wet, and without warning it gave away, and he got sucked into a fast-moving underground river pitch black, completely submerged, and at the mercy of the current as it buffeted him against the sides of the tunnel. After some time, the current subsided, and he realized he was in a larger pocket, still pitch black and submerged. He said that even as he struggled to hold his breath, he didn't panic and realized that the water had to keep moving somewhere, so he moved around until he found another tunnel that sucked him in. At one point, he began to see light, so he punched upwards, broke through the ground and pulled himself out, soaking wet, gasping for air, and a bit of a distance from the other dry hikers, who were somewhat bewildered when they saw him straggling up to them. Charles Sobridge, aka the Bikini Killer. He would drug and rob tourists, later moving on to drugging and murdering them. Between 12 and 24 people. He's escaped from jail at least 4 times. He taught himself psychology, Machiavellianism and other manipulation techniques. He's so dangerous that he's not allowed visits from guards unless those guards have guards. One of the times he escaped was done in a sickening way. In Greece, he was in jail for robbing tourists. He got a syringe and filled a cup with his own blood, then drank it all. Once the guards saw him puking out blood, they took him to the infirmary where he managed to put a sedative in a guard's tea and then escape from jail. That's how good he was. He even seduced his lawyer, then went on to have a child with his lawyer's daughter. A woman who went to my regular pub was out with her friend during the day, and in the evening, she missed a bus home and ended up in another pub. She was tipsy and ended up going home with a man who lived with another male. They both had an obsession with serial killers and murdered her, and after they killed her they chopped her body up. They spent the next week putting her body in plastic bags and hiding them in bushes, etc. They were caught pretty quickly, and thankfully are in prison for life. The day she went missing I saw her in the pub with her friend, and stood in the smoking area with her laughing about a pigeon who was chilling too. I have a video where she is in it, and she makes a joke just hours before her death. I think about her nearly every day. It's something that is sort of traumatizing, and she did not deserve such a cruel ending to her life. H. Holmes and the Murder Castle. He was formerly accused of 27 murders, but found guilty of only 1. These are his murder stats. 10 to 34 killed. 200 plus estimated/possible. This is the related Wikipedia article. This story definitely isn't the scariest in these comments, but another woman fell in love with my great-grandfather, and he was already married to my great-grandmother. So she came to their home with a gun while he was at work. When my great-grandmother opened the door, she shot her point blank. However, my grandmother, then 3-ish years old, was behind her, watching everything. I guess she concluded that she wouldn't remember, or wouldn't be believed, or simply couldn't shoot a child, being a mother herself, and thankfully didn't shoot her. This was around 1930, forensics weren't very advanced. No evidence was left. The case goes cold. Life continued on, and eventually the woman, named Lorraine, got what she wanted. She convinced my great-grandfather to marry her. She had 2 children from a previous marriage, both older than my grandmother. I don't know what happened to her first husband, honestly. She told everyone exactly who murdered her mother, but no one believed her. Who would believe a kid who obviously misses her mother, and is having trouble adjusting to her new family? People just thought she demonized her stepmother for replacing her mom. Or maybe imagined it. It's an easy conclusion to reach, honestly. And so years and years pass. She grows up with her mother's murderer in her own house, sleeping rooms away. And Lorraine knows that she knows. She appears like the perfect housewife, swooping in and caring for the grieving father and child. My grandmother grows up tormented by her and her children. There was obvious favoritism. The stepkids are spoiled, and she's the black sheep of the family. She moves out and marries my grandfather the first chance she gets. She moves on and has children of her own. 5 boys. Lorraine became ill and finally landed on her deathbed. And there, she finally confessed to the truth and told everyone what she had done. I guess she was worried about the state of her soul. 57 years had passed since the murder. 16 since my great-grandfather had passed. He never knew the truth. No documents were ever officially amended to state that she was the murderer, as far as I know. The authorities consider the case cold, still, almost 100 years later. It drives me nuts that my grandmother always knew. And even after she was an adult, people just said, "Oh, you had an active imagination as a child." There's no way. To live with that knowledge for so long, and have no one in the world on your side. Your whole family against you. That's what scares me. 215 children's unmarked graves were just discovered at a residential school in Kamloops, BC, Canada. The beginnings, I suspect, of many future discoveries, as public pressure is beginning to mount on the federal gov and the church to finally start funding and investigating the real extent of the brutality of Indian residential schools across the country. As somebody born and raised in Canada, my knowledge of the residential school system, which operated up until the late 60s. During the Blitz, someone broke into my grandmother's house and hid under her bed for 11 days. Apparently, there was a dispute with a neighbor after my great-grandmother reported them for hoarding food. They had all the food seized, and for whatever reason the neighbor broke in during an evening where they were all out and hid under the bed. They stayed there for 11 days before they got incredibly ill and started coughing their lungs out during the early hours of a Sunday morning. This led my great-grandfather to come in the room thinking it was his daughter, but finding his daughter had fallen asleep on the sofa and the man was under her bed. Apparently he confessed to the whole thing, and if it wasn't for a broken window causing a draft, my grandmother would have been killed, or worse. It's not the scariest, but definitely one of the saddest. But imagine this happening to you. Omaira Sanchez was a young girl who was a victim of death after a volcanic eruption. She was 13, but her death wasn't quick. She was trapped neck-deep in water, but rescuers could not get her out. They had stayed with her for 3 days while she slowly died. Her legs were caught under debris. The team thought about amputating her legs, but didn't think she would survive the procedure. Many people, not just Omaira, suffered agonizing and unthinkable deaths caused by the mud this volcano caused. Some drowned, others suffocated, the list goes on. Only 1/5 of the town survived. It took literal hours for the rescuers to reach the town. But when they found Omaira, they never left her side. Until she died, they gave her water and food. Their efforts to save her never stopped. Eventually, she succumbed to the freezing temperatures and died of hypothermia. Imagine being 13, watching your home die, and having to accept death? She accepted it, not knowing exactly when she'd die, but knowing it'd be soon, and that she wouldn't be able to get out. Slenderman has always creeped me out. Imagine taking a very good friend out into the woods and stabbing her more than 20 times, without feeling any empathy for having done so, and all in the name of a fictional meme on something awful. I lived next to a murderer. Faye Swedlick was 6 years old when she was kidnapped out of her front yard. It was all over the news. I had news crews, cops, even the FBI all over my townhouse complex. My fiancé and I met with the FBI 3 times. They searched our home and everything. I remember clear as day, my fiancé FaceTimed me as the cops were digging through the trash cans directly in front of my townhouse. They pulled out her boot and a bloody knife. Then, they found her body, dumped maybe 300 feet from my house. He had watched them find the murder weapon. Dumbass put it in a trash bag along with his other mail. He went to his back porch and opened his own throat. It's crazy. I had conversations with the guy. I never knew he was a psycho. This all happened a year ago. The Villisca Axe Murders. In 1912, on a farm outside of the small town of Villisca, Iowa, a family of 6 and 2 of the children's friends were murdered in the middle of the night with an axe, with some alleging the young girls were molested. Many suspects, but nobody was ever convicted. The house is still standing and available to visit, and obviously many people claim it's haunted. On 1983 in Juarez City, border neighbor to El Paso, had a Cobalt-60 incident. It is regarded as the Mexican Chernobyl. Basically, some guys working maintenance in a hospital were greenlit to split for parts whatever they found at the old warehouse, and they found a machine that worked with Cobalt-60 pellets. The guys poked around and drove around town to sell their stuff and irradiated the city. The place they sold it to use the metal to recast as building materials and sell them. It's quite a horror story of the city I grew up in. 2.3 million gallons of molasses exploded out of a poorly made container in Boston and flooded a neighborhood, killing 21 people and injuring 150. The scary part is hearing about how people tried to swim out of it, but it was too thick. They got tired and would sink under the molasses slowly and suffocate as they tried to breathe. The thought of this death haunts me. I'm not claustrophobic, but I could imagine it being a total nightmare for someone who is. The story of Thad Phillips. A kid in Wisconsin would kidnap boys and spend several hours a day breaking every bone in their legs. This poor boy finally escaped after countless hours of abuse over several days. His legs were swollen to the size of basketballs by the time he was found. Small Town Murder did an episode on it, number 32. Hearing all the details and his initial attempts to escape will make you visibly cringe. Took days for me to stop thinking about it. The survival story of Jeffrey Prescott. The only place I can find it is in an old book I have, the 1988 Reader's Digest book Facts and Fallacies, in the Fortune and Misfortune chapter. All credit goes to this book, although I paraphrased almost all of what you are about to read. I don't know if this really counts as scary, but here we go. Jeffrey Prescott was on a hike across the Mara Mountains with 2 others, Noel Smith and Mick Hyatt. While walking along the edge of an extinct volcano, Prescott fell an unknown amount of feet into the crater of the volcano. He laid there unconscious while his companions trekked down to him. Smith and Hyatt decided to go for help at a nearby village, but it would take them a week minimum, which Prescott knew was far too long. With the temperatures exceeding 100 degrees Fahrenheit and having only a few pints of water, Prescott was certain he would perish before the others returned. During the time he was waiting, a small fire burned up his medical supplies and food, with Prescott having to drag himself away from the blaze. He remained there for 2 days and nights, and dragged himself further down the crater area, hoping he could find water there. At about 10 a.m. on the 4th day, I had miraculously arrived with some medical experts. He had reached the village in only 3 days, and had returned almost immediately via horseback and a jeep. Prescott was immensely relieved, and drank 2 quarts of water before being driven to a hospital in a stretcher. At the hospital, they discovered that his injuries consisted of a cracked skull, a broken wrist, several smashed vertebrae, and torn ligaments in his knee, and he had survived all that while on the road to the hospital. Prescott was inspired to study nursing after this ordeal, and as he said, his own miraculous survival had convinced him to help others to face and defeat death. I'm sure everyone has already hit on the pop culture ones, so I'll go personal. I grew up on a ranch, raising large hoofstock and poultry. Over the winter, we would buy hay from a neighbor and store it in the barn. Something like 80 tons. We get a call one summer from the hay guy's wife, in hysterics that we have to find another hay guy because her husband was crushed by the baler. These weren't cowgirl bales, but half-done ones. She told us the baler had gotten twine snarled under the tilt table that slides complete bales off. He hopped off the tractor, wriggled on in under the table to reach the twine, as he had undoubtedly done many times before, only for the tilt to collapse backwards with a mostly complete bale on it. Pancake from the hips up. Mom had nightmares about my dad getting killed in a similar manner for months. The toy box killer, I believe, was his name. There was audio recordings he would play for each of his victims when they first woke up. I found them transcribed to text a while back, and only got a few paragraphs in before I had to stop reading. It was the most disturbing thing I've ever encountered on the normal web. He claimed to have over 40 victims during the course of his activity. He's famous for saying, "If people knew the joys of having a woman tied up in your basement, that's where all the woman would be." Link to the transcripts. Read at your own risk. It is very messed up, and I've never been able to get through the whole thing. The tapes that the toy box killer would play for his newest victims, describing in detail what they were about to go through. While I haven't listened to them, I made the mistake of reading the transcripts. Holy fuck. The fact that actual monsters like this exist is beyond terrifying. Those poor women. The German cannibal story. It's in one of Rammstein's songs. A guy advertised that he wanted someone to be eaten, literally. A guy responded affirmatively after a while. The guy arrives. He cuts the guy's dick. Cooks it. They both try to eat it. They couldn't, too soft. The dick went to the dog to eat, he eats it. The guy eventually died from blood lost. It was all recorded in video and shown in court. The cannibal wanted to prove, and proven, the guy agreed and accepted everything he had done to him. Germans right? It was the first time I agreed, and still agree. I know nothing about human nature, neither have the slightest fucking imagination to conceive what people can do to each other, neither what motivates them, and what builds their inclinations. There's things I don't want to know, makes me want to go live in a fucking island. So this isn't necessarily a horror story. Okay, it kind of is. It was definitely a nightmare-inducing experience. So this was years ago. One evening my brother is getting ready for bed, and he had a retainer he was supposed to wear to bed. Now here's the thing. My brother is a clean freak, especially with personal hygiene. He actually has some minor OCD with personal hygiene rituals, and he's gotten better as he's gotten older, but the point is, he is rigorous about personal hygiene. So my brother was getting ready for bed, and opens the sealed container where he keeps his retainer after he washes it every morning and pops his retainer into his mouth. And he feels it start wiggling. So he pops it out of his mouth like WTF, and there's a giant maggot in his retainer. No freaking clue how it could have possibly gotten into his retainer case. He threw the retainer away. The hot zone. The story about the 1989 Reston, Virginia outbreak of Ebola. How close we came to having an actual Ebola outbreak in the US. Goes into graphic detail about the virus and its effects on humans. And the close calls we had with the outbreak that was thankfully contained by the US military. I'm an electrician, and I've seen some really scary things that have been under homeowners' noses for a long time. The worst I've seen is in the house I grew up in. A couple of years ago, the high voltage line on the electrical pole fell on my mother's electrical line. It literally shot the main lug through the 1/8 thick steel panel cover and destroyed everything that was plugged in. This came a year after the boiler went and almost burned the whole house down. Outside of that is homeowners replacing outlets themselves and pretty much making the whole house energized. Just imagine having your siding on your house able to kill you if you touch it. Recently, a good friend let his 2 kids use scuba gear in a pool. He didn't test the breathing gas. It was pure helium and both kids were brain dead and later died.